The Great Smog of 1952 descended upon the city of London like a shroud of darkness, weaving itself into the very fabric of daily life. The fog, thick and suffocating, settled over the city for 5 days, from December the 5th to December the 9th. This event was triggered by a mixture of industrial pollution and high-pressure weather conditions. The city was brought to a near standstill, and tragically, the smog caused thousands of deaths. It also gave the criminal community many opportunities, some of these undesirables using this as a cover for some very sinister acts, which would add to the death count. London had forever been subject to misty weather, or pea supers as they came to be called, because of their thickness and yellow-green colour. Such all-encompassing fogs swiftly evolved into a trademark of the capital by the 19th century. Nevertheless, the predicament of the polluted fog had plagued London for as far back as the 13th century, courtesy of sea coals found in the northeast coast of England that was being used as fuel. Soon the air was reeking of dirty fumes, making it intolerable to breathe in London. In 1307, Edward I issued a royal proclamation prohibiting the use of sea coal due to the smell affecting the air, but also due to its impact on health. Edward II went a step further. Those found fouling the air with coal smoke were to be tortured. Other early monarchs also passed laws to limit coal burning, but it had minimal impact. As industry advanced towards the 1700s, the conditions deteriorated even further. These fogs were not natural atmospheric formations. Water vapour would combine with particles from coal-burning factories, creating dense clouds that limited visibility. This type of fog eventually became known as smog. By the 19th century and the rise of the Industrial Revolution, air pollution was on the increase, and the rise in industrial jobs led to a neglect of the pollution issue, which would result in the frequent 5-day smogs. There were deaths due to these smogs, but nothing like what was to come in 1952. Due to factories moving out of the city during the 20th century, the smog problem became less frequent. But an unusual weather condition on the 5th of December would cause the most horrendous conditions London had ever seen. On that day, an anticyclone, a term used to indicate fair weather where high-pressure air moves apart and sinks, set in over London. This condition caused an inversion where cold air was stuck beneath warmer air higher in the atmosphere. As a result, emissions from factories and residential fires were unable to disperse into the air and instead became trapped near the ground. This led to extreme pollution levels, but as Londoners were accustomed to thick smog, they did not comprehend the lethal nature of this specific smog. They attempted to continue with their daily lives as best they could. Struggling to breathe, people faced the suffocating effects of the poisonous air. The smog seeped indoors, rendering indoor spaces equally hazardous. There seemed to be no escape from this nightmarish smog. It was a particularly cold winter that December, and more coal fires were being used. Unfortunately, but understandably, most people adopted for the cheaper nutty slack coal that consisted of coal nuggets and coal dust, as this hadn't been rationed unlike the better quality coal. Although it was cold, there had been little wind over London. It became perfect conditions for the anticyclone that descended upon the city, sealing the city's fate. A lethal concoction of pollutants festered into the stagnant air. Factories belched forth their noxious emissions, and coal fires burned unabated, their acrid smoke mingling with the fog to form a lethal miasma. The smog was so thick, transport was halted, except maybe the odd bus that crawled along the roads with the help of the police trying to light their way. Boats were docked and airline passengers were transported to Bournemouth, where the conditions were okay to fly. Ambulances warned people they may not be able to get to them, and if they did, they feared for the safety of both the drivers and the patients. People had no option. They had to find their own way to hospitals. All entertainment and sport activities were cancelled. Cinemas closed as the poisonous fog seeped into the premises. Street lights had little effect, barely penetrating the dark smog. People wearing masks shuffled along, feeling their way along the paths. Milkmen couldn't deliver, so the great British cuppa suppers had to go without. As the week went on, the city tried to get back to some sort of normality, but it wasn't easy. The only form of transport that was somewhat reliable was the underground trains. Driving was way too dangerous and obvious accidents occurred. But it wasn't just people who suffered. Animals were also struggling. Farmers watched helplessly as their stock struggled to breathe, with many animals dying. Eventually the winds came and the smog began to dissipate. Unfortunately, there were deaths, but hospital staff didn't link them straight away to the current situation, as they had previously witnessed individuals with health issues like asthma and breathing conditions struggle during periods of smog. There was no data that connected all of the deaths, but even the doctors in the hospital said, "You know, we just thought we had a really rough few days." It didn't occur to people that this happened across the city. Most of those affected were the young, the elderly, and those with ongoing respiratory problems. The death count grew and continued to grow as the effects of the poisonous smog eventually took their lives. In the midst of this chaos, amidst the choking haze and the despair of the afflicted, a darker element emerged. Criminals, emboldened by the cover of a smog, prowled the streets like wolves in search of prey. Pickpockets plied their trade with impunity, while burglars and thieves stalked their unsuspecting victims through the swirling mists. But one name stood out amongst the rest: John Reg Christie. The author Kate Dawson, while writing about the Great Smog of 1952, realised Christie's connection was around this time and decided to look into this case that dominated the news at that time. To quote Kate Dawson in an interview, "What surprised me about John Christie's case," she began, "besides the incredible media attention that it received, is that there was a lot of controversy. Christie had a neighbour who was eventually hanged, partly because of Christie's testimony. The man had been convicted of killing his wife and child, and later it was found that Christie had confessed that Christie was really guilty, and the man was posthumously exonerated. And so I went into this case really feeling like I was going to find the same evidence and come to the same conclusion, and really didn't come to the same conclusion. And that was surprising to me." I fell into the trap that a lot of people do, which is just assuming that history and conventional wisdom is right. After looking at all the evidence, I don't think Christie's confession was right, and I think the right man was hanged for the killing of the wife and the child. I think people really just did not want to believe that two people could be living in the same house at the same time and both be killers and not know each other or work together. And I believe it's absolutely feasible. When asked, "What evidence did you find that convinced you of this?" she replied, "Speaking to the police officer Len Trevelyan, who helped investigate the case, we talked about how the crime wasn't feasible the way John Christie laid it out. I looked at the pathologist's report, which to me was the most interesting. The wife, who was Beryl Evans, had many photographs of her before they buried her, and the pathologist, buried deep in his report, said that she'd been hit in the mouth so hard that her lip was touching her nose, and that's very hard. And the way the blood clotted, he estimated that she'd been hit 20 minutes before she died." I gave that photo to present-day pathologists, 2 of them, and they agreed. Yeah, it looks like she was hit about 20 minutes before. Now, in what world is a woman going to let a neighbour hit her, sit around for 20 minutes and then strangle her? It doesn't make any sense. No one heard her scream. But her husband was abusive and hit her all the time. So to me that makes sense, is that the husband hit her and they fought and then he killed her later. When John Christie confessed to the killing of his neighbour's wife and child, I think it was just taken as gospel. Christie was confessing to killing everybody under the sun because he wanted to escape the death penalty by appearing insane. So he had what he called the more the merrier defence. And I didn't believe any of his confessions. Of course, the truth lies with both of them, who are dead. Ends Miss Kate Dawson. So as we go on through the years, we will always hear of differing conclusions to the Evans and Christie case. But the fact is, we will probably never know. The timing of this incident coincided with the devastating smog that claimed many lives from all walks of life. However, the media frenzy surrounding the Evans and Christie case overshadowed the tragic stories of those who perished due to the poisonous smog. As for the smog, it persisted for 5 days, finally lifting on December the 9th. Its true impact wasn't fully grasped until weeks later, when the Registrar General released figures revealing approximately 4,000 fatalities. However, some individuals would continue to experience the effects of the smog. In the aftermath of the Great Smog, the government enacted the Clean Air Act of 1956, a belated attempt to stem the tide of pollution that had wrought such devastation upon the city. This, for the first time, regulated both domestic and industrial smoke emissions. It restricted the burning of coal in urban areas and authorised local councils to set up smoke-free zones. Yet for many years it was too little too late. The scars of that fateful week would linger for years to come, with the eventual death toll estimated to be 12,000 people. The Clean Air Act was a slow-moving process, and it wasn't until the 1980s that the skies began to clear. But the problem, unfortunately, is still ongoing.